What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I want to update my greatest top 10 fighters of all times. Now, I did a video like this about a year ago, but this one will be an updated version of that. And those of you who know my channel and know me know that I have Sam LangFord as the greatest fighter of all times, and I'm going to explain why. Now, I'm not going to get too caught up in Sam LangFord. I want to get through every fighter within the top 10 that I can within one video, within one take, hopefully. But Sam LangFord really needs to be clarified. His profile needs to be clarified because he's very underrated. He just is. And hopefully I can make it a little more clear as to why it makes sense for him to be at least considered as the greatest fighter. Now, he was born on March 4th, 1883 in Weymouth Falls, Digby County, Nova Scotia. That's in Canada. He died January 12th, 1956. He was 72 years of age at the time of his death. He would reside in Cambridge, Middlesex County, and Massachusetts. What's interesting about Sam LangFord is that he began his boxing career after an abusive household in Canada. He would reside in Boston, Massachusetts. He would find himself in a local gym, the Lennox Athletic Club. And he began his career as a janitor, as the Barbados demon Joe Walcott ended his career as a janitor. You see, Walcott found himself in New York, Madison Square Garden as a janitor. And Sam LangFord found himself as a janitor before he actually took up the game of boxing at the Lennox Athletic Club. Now, these two men would face one another. Controversial outcome. But Sam LangFord fought from featherweight all the way to the heavyweight division. Now, I want to break this down and I want to get on to other fighters. But Sam LangFord stood 5'4" 3/4". Now, you look in the record books and it'll tell you 5'7" or 5.5 inches. It was 5'6" 3/4". You'll also find that he weighed 142 to 185 pounds. He actually weighed 118 to 183.25 pounds. Started as a featherweight. 3 amateur fights, he would become the Boston featherweight champion. Now, the only other fighter that can come close to something like that would be Eddie Charles. Eddie Charles started out as an amateur in the featherweight division. However, he did not win a title as a featherweight. Sam LangFord did. Eddie Charles would win the World Heavyweight Championship belt. 1949, the NBA version from Joe Walcott, Jersey Joe. But Sam LangFord fought for the welterweight, lightweight, and a heavyweight. Now, as I quickly go through his career, you're going to see how he was shortchanged. And he fought all the weight divisions. He fought mostly all the champions in all the weight divisions, but most of those titles were not on the line. That's the difference between him and Charles, although Charles' only opportunity was the heavyweight division. And he succeeded in that. Then he solidified it in 1950 in New York Yankee Stadium with Joe Louis. He would lose it in 51 with Walcott. So let's get back to Sam LangFord. He fought between 1902 and 1926. And the record they have here is 252 world professional bouts. They have him winning 178, knocking out 129. And losing 32 fights. They also have him having 40 draws. What they failed to tell you, that he had over 200 no-decision fights. See, Sam LangFord had over 500 fights. The only fighter, in fact, let me get to this. He'd be entered into the Ring Boxing Hall of Fame, the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. He won a Boston Featherweight Championship as an amateur. won the colored middleweight championship, the colored heavyweight championship. Now, some say 5-time colored heavyweight champion. Some say 7-time heavyweight champion. He won the Australian heavyweight championship, Mexican heavyweight championship, and the European heavyweight championship. That's Sam LangFord. The only fighter to fight the first black lightweight champion, Joe Gans. Fought on December 8th, 1903. Title was originally scheduled to be on the line. And Joe Gans had came from Philadelphia 3 days prior. And he fought Dave Holly, who was the king of the shoulder roll. Then he went up to Boston to face Sam LangFord. But it was told that he didn't have to make weight because they didn't want Joe Gans to have to suffer his weight. He just fought in Philadelphia. Sam LangFord gets the opportunity to face Joe Gans. And when he gets there, there's a scale. And he's wondering why there's a scale, and they told him he had to make weight. That was unjustified. So he was already there. He decided to face Joe Gans, and he defeated Joe Gans, but it was for a non-title affair. He's the first fighter to fight the first black welterweight champion. Now, Barbados Demon Joe Walcott. September 5th, 1904. 15-round draw. And the crowd had booed because they felt as though Sam LangFord was shafted. Sam LangFord was the first fighter and the only fighter to fight the first black middleweight champion. And that was Tiger Flowers. Now, Tiger Flowers wasn't the middleweight champion yet. He became champion in the middleweight division in 1926. He defeated Harry Greb. But Tiger Flowers would become the first black middleweight champion. And Sam LangFord would be in the ring with him. Sam LangFord would face the first black heavyweight champion and Jack Johnson. April 26, 1906. No other fighter has ever done this in boxing history. And he went the distance with Jack Johnson. He had a broken hand going into that fight, but he had to accept the fight while the opportunity was there. Jack Johnson became the colored heavyweight champion in 1903 when he defeated Denver Ed Martin. And 3 years later, Sam LangFord would get an opportunity. Now, here's what's interesting about this situation here. When Sam LangFord faced Joe Gans in 1903, that same year, a fighter by the name of Jack Root had a manager who was a sports writer and a promoter at the same time. And he didn't want to face Sam LangFord. So he had his fighter move out of that weight division. He created a weight division called the Light Heavyweight Championship. And he put him in there with Kid McCoy. They called him the real McCoy. He was famous for the corkscrew punch. And after Jack Root defeated Kid McCoy, he had a portion of that light heavyweight championship. He had to solidify it and unify it by facing George Gardner. He lost to George Gardner. Then George Gardner became basically the first light heavyweight champion. Undisputed. But that left Sam LangFord in the loop because Sam LangFord was in line for that opportunity. So instead of going to middleweight, he went straight to welterweight and challenged the Barbados Demon Joe Walcott in 1904. So that's really what happened in that light heavyweight division. So speaking of light heavyweights, Sam LangFord would also be in the ring, the Philadelphia Jack OBrien. Now, Philadelphia Jack OBrien would face Tommy Burns. And Jack OBrien would face Sam LangFord, but he didn't want to put his title on the line. And so therefore, it was a non-title affair, and Sam LangFord would defeat Philadelphia Jack OBrien. Sam LangFord should have got that shot with Tommy Burns, but they gave it to Philadelphia Jack OBrien. I want you to look at the details of the unjust of these fighters that we're talking about. So that's another opportunity for the light heavyweight championship belt that Sam Langford would not get. He didn't get an opportunity for the heavyweight championship belt with Tommy Burns because it was given to the man who he already defeated in Philadelphia, Jack OBrien. Instead, eventually in 1908, Tommy Burns would give Jack Johnson an opportunity. But he demanded $30,000, but Jack Johnson got pennies for it. Same thing happened to Archie Moore, 1952, with Joey Maxim. I'll get into that when we talk about Archie Moore. So I'm not going to stay on Sam Langford too long. I think you got the idea. But he also was in the ring with some great fighters from the colored heavyweight division. He was in the ring with Joe Jeanette. Joe Jeanette stood 5 foot 10 inches. He had a 74-inch reach. He had a total bout career of 104 fights, 83 wins, 69 knockouts. He lost 10 fights, had 10 draws, and 69 no decisions. Now, I'm sorry, he had 69 KOs. But the thing is, with him, he fought Jack Johnson 10 times, Harry Wills twice, Kid Norfolk twice, battling Jim Johnson, Bill Tate, Cleve Hawkins, just to name an example. He was a street fighter before he turned professional as an organized fighter. He actually fought like Kimbo Slice. He'd meet you wherever you wanted him to be met. And he would fight you next to a car, next to a fire hydrant, no matter where it was. And he would knock guys out with one punch. And he didn't weigh in the heavyweight division. He was more of a super middleweight when he was coming up. And he had issues with one arm was a little bit longer than the other arm. It was an issue with his arm. But he was from Hoboken, New Jersey, has a wonderful family, and he was one hell of a fighter. He was avoided as well. He was in the ring with Harry Wills. Harry Wills stood 6 foot 2 inches from New Orleans. Had 103 total bouts, 79 wins, 49 knockouts. He would lose 10 fights and have 4 draws. He retired in 1932 at the age of 43. And he would earn $100,000 because he had apartments that he would rent out in Harlem. He fought Sam Langford 22 times. He won 6. He lost 2. And it was several no decisions. He was stripped in 1926 because it was claimed that he filed Jack Sharkey. And so therefore they stripped him of his colored heavyweight championship belt, Larry Gans. And that went to George Goffey. And Harry Wills only wanted an opportunity to face Jack Johnson. It was already contracted. It was agreed. It was legalized. Jack Dempsey ran away from Harry Wills. He made him fight fighters such as Louis Angel Firpo and others. Until it got to a point where Harry Wills had no more, and he would lose 3 months later, in 1926, after Jack Dempsey would lose to Gene Tunney. Wills would lose to Jack Sharkey, and that would basically be about it. And I think he was stopped by Paulino Escobar. But Harry Wills was a hell of a fighter. He was just treated horribly in the game of boxing. The other fighter that Sam Langford would face in the colored heavyweight division would be Sam McVeigh. My God, did he have a war in 1909 in Paris, France with Joe Jeanette. 47 knockdowns, 50 rounds. One of the most brutal fights in boxing history. He stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches. He had a 75-inch reach. Had total bouts of 191 fights, 75 wins, 13 losses, 61 by the knockout rule. He was stopped 5 times. He was in the ring with Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost, Harry Wells, Joe Jeanette, and Sam LangFord. Incredible fighter was Sam McVeigh. Sam LangFord found himself in a ring with Stanley Ketchel. Defeated him. They made it a no decision. So Harry Woodson made it clear he would go to the marshals if they didn't get a rematch. Rematch was granted. Unfortunately for Stanley Ketchel and Sam LangFord, Stanley Ketchel was killed by Walter Dipley. It was a charge brought up, but it never carried out because Stanley Ketchel didn't survive. Stanley Ketchel was a middleweight champion, and he would go back and forth with a fighter by the name of Billy Papke. Billy Papke was from Spring Valley, Illinois. And these two men would get it on back and forth. They would exchange titles. Billy Papke would eventually become the middleweight champion again, because they had fighters such as Mike Gibbons and others who had claimants to the middleweight championship belt. But it'll go back to Billy Papke. Sam LangFord never got his shot. He should have been a claimant. He should have gotten an opportunity after Stanley Ketchel, but they avoided him. He was willing to come back down and wait. Amazing. Sam LangFord was in a ring with Jack Blackburn 6 times. 1 no contest, 4 draws, and 1 win. Jack Blackburn would go into the Hall of Fame as one of the greatest trainers of all time. Should have also been considered one of the greatest fighters. He was in the ring with Dave Holly and Joe Gans and Sam LangFord and Harry Greb, many, many others. One of the greatest fighters of all times was Jack Blackburn. Sam LangFord was in a ring with Fred Fulton. Didn't come out for the 7th round. He had a severe laceration above his top gum. And he just couldn't come out. And so therefore, Fred Fulton, who was a full-fledged heavyweight, would win that match. Next fight is Harry Greb, who's known as Edward Henry Greb. Pittsburgh Windmill, Smoke City Wildcat. Fought from welterweight, middleweight, and light heavyweight. He actually started out as a light heavyweight. He was born June 6, 1894, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He died October 22nd, 1926. He was 32 years of age at his unfortunate death, and resided in Atlantic City. He had a procedure of an eye injury, detached retina. 1921, he had faced Kid Norfolk. And he fought 47 more fights before his career ended. He wanted to get a procedure done. He died on the operating table. And several months later, Tiger Flowers, who took the title from Harry Greb, suffered the same exact death. Same exact procedure. It's amazing. But Harry Greb fought fighters such as Tommy Gibbons, who was to your right. He's out of St. Paul. He was the younger brother of Mike Gibbons. Now, I mentioned Mike Gibbons once before, and he was a claimant of the middleweight championship belt when Stanley Ketchel was killed. And that was supposed to go to Sam LangFord, but it didn't go to Sam LangFord. It went back to Billy Papke. It's just crazy. But Tommy Gibbons was also in the ring with Mike Gibbons, his older brother. He was in the ring with Joe Chick. That was one of his losses of the 2. He was knocked out cold in a corner. Didn't know where he was when he got up. Joe Chick was also in the ring representing Jack Dempsey when he fought Jess Willard. You also had Big Black Bill Tate, as well as Harry Wiley Sr., the water boy for Jack Dempsey. But Harry Greb was also in the ring with Billy Misk. He was out of St. Paul as well. Now, Billy Misk would suffer from Bright disease, kidney failure. And he would die at a very early age in his life. He only wanted his family to have the best Christmas ever, so he took on one last fight with Bill Brennan. Bill Brennan was a heavyweight who actually challenged Jack Dempsey 3 separate occasions, but once for the heavyweight championship belt in 1920. And Billy Misk was a very good opponent for Harry Greb. Greb was in a ring with Mike O'Dowd, also out of St. Paul. Mike O'Dowd became middleweight champion when he defeated Al McCoy. He would lose his title to Johnny Wilson, 1920. Johnny Wilson would lose his title to Harry Greb in 1923, and that's when Greb would become middleweight champion of the world. But before he was middleweight champion, he was the America's light heavyweight champion when he defeated Gene Tunney, 1922. They fought 5 times, and Tunney would lose only once. Most observers thought that Tunney lost 3 fights. But he would defeat him once. Greb would defeat him once, and the rest would be no decisions. So therefore it would go to it would go to Gene Tunney. So this is Mike O'Dowd. Harry Greb would also be in the ring with Jack Dillon. They called him Giant Killer. And he would become the light heavyweight champion. Very strong fighter. But he couldn't handle Harry Greb. Too much of an attack. In 1925, Harry Greb would be in the ring with Mickey Walker. Mickey Walker would become middleweight champion of the world when he defeated Tiger Flowers in 1926. But Mickey Walker would become welterweight champion when he defeated Jack Britton. And he would lose his title to Pete Latzo, regain it from Latzo, give up the belt to move up in the middleweight division. He would face Jock Malone and move his way up as high as the heavyweight division, taking on Jack Sharkey. 2 weeks later, Jack Sharkey became heavyweight champion of the world, and he would face Max Smelling, who, interesting enough, Max Smelling would challenge Jack Sharkey in 1930 for the heavyweight championship belt when Gene Tunney would relinquish his title after facing Tom Heaney out of New Zealand, 1928. In 1932, Jack Sharkey would defeat Smelling and become the heavyweight champion of the world. But before that, he would be disqualified for hitting Max Smelling low. Max Smelling would win the title that way. He would face young Stribling and fight Jack Sharkey a second time. So Max Smelling was a very good fighter. We'll learn more about him when we talk about Joe Louis, my number 7 ranked greatest fighter, with Mickey Walker, Toy Bulldog, Elizabeth, New Jersey. He was in there with them all. He was in there with Dave Shade and many, many others. Maxie Rosenbloom. So shout out to Mickey Walker, Toy Bulldog. Quick story with Harry Greb. After their fight, Mickey Walker and Harry Greb would hang one up, as they call it. They would drink a little liquor in a saloon. Mickey Walker would keep heckling Harry Greb about that fight. Harry Greb didn't like it. He said, if you really feel that way, let's step outside. Mickey Walker said, let's do it. Harry Greb walked out first, and from behind, Mickey Walker would snuff him, throw him to the ground, and hit him in the back of the head as he was on the ground, because Harry Greb's elbow got caught into his coat sleeve, and he couldn't get it out in time. So his arm was stuck into his coat sleeve as he was getting hammered in the back of the head. They would break it up, and a rematch would not follow. So Harry Greb, Mickey Walker. Quite a story, 1925. Now you heard me mention Dave Shade as a Mickey Walker opponent. Harry Greb would be in the ring with him as well. It was a California welterweight. Very, very good fight. He had a good fight with Jimmy Slattery out of Buffalo. That was a major fight. But Dave Shade Another good fighter, an opponent of Harry Greb. Greb would find himself in a ring with McVeigh Rosenbloom. McVeigh Rosenbloom became a light heavyweight champion. He became an actor, an outstanding actor when his career was over, but he was in a ring with every fighter. Had the highest record of all time. And what's interesting about him and Archie Moore, he had the least knockouts in light heavyweight championship history, and Archie Moore had the most. 132. And Rosenbloom had, I believe, 26 knockouts out of the 200 plus fights, close to 300 fights that he had. They called him Slappy Maxie. But he was something else. Greb be in the ring with him as well. Now the thing is, I'm showing you my exhibit card collection, and I have to take them out of the protective seal to prevent the blur. So the things I'm doing for these videos is hopefully it's appreciated. Al McCoy was the middleweight champion. He was from Brooklyn, New York. He would lose his title to Mike O'Dowd. And Mike O'Dowd, like I said, would lose his title to Johnny Wilson. But Al McCoy would get it on Harry Greb. Eddie McCarthy was out of Wisconsin. Another good fighter that Harry Greb would be in the ring with. And what you need to know about these fighters, when you look at the Adrian Broners and other fighters like that today, that's who these guys were in their time. That's who they were looked at of their time. That's who they were respected as at their time. So far, Sam LangFord and Harry Greb fought the best that they had to offer during their time. You have to understand that when you're judging fighters. You must keep that in consideration because that's who they had to deal with. But they fought them multiple times. They fought them 2 weeks apart. You're not getting that today, so there's no comparison today. So that's a different conversation. That's why they're not in my top 10. That's why the fighters that I'm naming today are in my top 10. So Harry Greb is the second fighter. It looks like I'm only going to be able to get this one video off, and I'll have to do probably every two fighters in the series because I want to go in more depth than I did the last time I did this series. So you could probably follow this series. It might be better to do it that way. But Eddie McCarthy and Harry Greb, it's actually a fascinating fight. Jimmy Clabby, from Indiana. Another good fighter. Harry Greb would find himself in a ring with. Amazing career that Harry Greb would have. Greb would be in the ring with Frank Klaus. Frank Klaus would lose his title to George Chip. You heard me talk about Joe Chip. That's George Chip's brother. And Harry Greb would face Frank Klaus. Frank Klaus was a pretty decent middleweight. He was a champion. He's one of the middleweight champions that Harry Greb would face. Harry Greb faced 5. The Cleveland Baker boy, Johnny Visco, heavyweight. Amazing career that Harry Greb would have. And that's why he's ranked number 2 in my book, greatest fighter. And as I judge fighters, I judge the character of the fighter, what the accomplishments were, the time in which they fought, how they handled the time in which they fought. Fighters today have it a little easier because they can negotiate. All they have to do is prove their worth. All they have to do is find some managers who have some connections. And they can make millions of dollars. But at this time, you had to fight your way to opportunity. And even then, you didn't get it. If you were a black fighter, you had to fight twice as hard, fight twice the amount of fights. And you would still avoid it. But as you can see here, Harry Greb, close to 300 fights. And he fought them all. He fought them all. Now, he didn't give certain fighters, Sam LangFord and others. He fought Sam LangFord in an underground fight. and was ruled as a no contest. He didn't give him a shot at the title. He fought Tiger Flowers and he lost. He fought Kid Norfolk. It didn't work out well for him. But he fought him. And for that reason, I have to make him number 2, my greatest fighter of all times. Ray Robinson, number 3. His name was Walker Smith. Fought in the lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, and light heavyweight divisions. He was born May 3rd, 1921 in Alley, Georgia. He died April 12th, 1989. Los Angeles, California. Had a fighting career record of 202 bouts, 173 wins, 109 knockouts, 19 losses, 6 draws, 2 no contests. How do I remember this stuff? He moved to Harlem, New York at the age of 12. After he was denied an opportunity to fight in the AAU games, he had to take on another fighter's name. His name was Ray Robinson. And he won the Metropolitan Bantamweight Championship belt, 1938. 1938 was some year for black fighters. Because not only did Ray Robinson win the North American Metropolitan Bantamweight Championship belt, you also had Ezzard Charles, who would do something similar in Cincinnati as a featherweight in 1938. You also had Charlie Burley, who took the title, the colored welterweight championship belt away from Coco Kid. You also had Henry Armstrong, who would win. In fact, he became the first black featherweight champion in New York's Madison Square Garden when he defeated Petey Cerrone in 1937. That same year, he would also